Johnny Tremain, Chapter 6, Part 5. Another couple questions to guide your thoughts here as we continue Chapter 6. Number 1. Considering poor Roch, the Quaker, what conflict are the sailors experiencing with regard to their shipments to Boston? Meaning, pay attention to this guy, Roch, the Quaker, and see what kind of conflict they're facing as men on the wharves. And number 2, how are the citizens of Boston involved in the protest? Part 5. Next morning, Johnny was up and out in the backyard early. At first, it seemed impossible to hold an axe in his left hand, steady it with his bad right. He gritted his teeth and persevered. Rab said nothing of his struggles. He merely set type, pulled proofs as usual. But often he was gone from home, and Johnny knew he was feeling about for those 15 to 20 boys he had promised. Would the others go and Johnny be left behind? He could not bear the thought, and Rab had promised him that in 20 days he might learn to chop. Having finished the logs in Mr. Lorne's backyard, he began chopping free gratis for the Afric Queen. Almost every day, and sometimes all day, the mass meetings at Old South Church went on. Tempers grew higher and higher. Boston was swept up with a passion it had not known since the Boston Massacre 3 years before. Riding this wild storm was Sam Adams and his trusty henchmen, directing it, building up the anger until, although the matter was not publicly mentioned, they would all see the only thing left for them to do was to destroy the tea. Sometimes Rab and Johnny went to these meetings. It happened they were there when the sheriff arrived and bade the meeting forthwith to disperse. He said it was lawless and treasonable. This proclamation from Governor Hutchinson was met with howls and hisses. They voted to disobey the order. Sometimes the boys slipped over to Griffin's Wharf. By the 8th of December, the Eleanor had joined the Dartmouth. These were strange ships. They had unloaded their cargoes, except the tea. The town of Boston had ordered them not to unload the tea, and the law stated they could not leave until they had unloaded. Nor would the governor give them a pass to return to England. At Castle Island, the British Colonel Leslie had orders to fire upon them if they attempted to sneak out of the harbor. The Active and the Kingfisher, British men of war, stood by ready to blast them out of the water if they obeyed the town and returned to London with the tea. The ships were held at Griffin's Wharf as though under an enchantment. Here was none of the usual hustle and bustle. Few of the crew were in sight, but hundreds of spectators gathered every day merely to stare at them. Johnny saw Roch, the 23-year-old Quaker who owned the Dartmouth, running about in despair. The governor would not let him leave. The town would not let him unload. Between them, he was a ruined man. He feared a mob would burn his ship. There was no mob, and night and day armed citizens guarded the ship. They would see to it that no tea was smuggled ashore, and that no harm was done to the ships. Back and forth paced the guard. Many of their faces were familiar to Johnny. One day, even John Hancock took his turn with a musket on his shoulder, and the next night he saw Paul Revere. Then, on the 15th, the third of the tea ships arrived. This was the brig, the Beaver.